All right, get ready, because today we're going deep, really deep, into a story you probably think you know. The Wise Men and the Star. You guys sent us a chapter from We Have Seen His Star, The Wise Men and Jesus. And let me tell you, this isn't the typical Christmas pageant stuff. There's some really interesting details here that, well, you might be surprised.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's a familiar story, sure, but most people kind of skim over it. But when you really dig in, there's like layers of meaning, historical context, theological depth, all just waiting to be explored.
Okay, let's unpack this. First off, who were these wise men? I mean,
Yeah.
were they actually kings like we always see in those Christmas plays and stuff?
Well, the chapter points out that they weren't kings, not at all. Think more like scholars, advisors, maybe even like ancient astrologers, but definitely not royalty. They were part of this respected group known for their wisdom and learning, and some of them, get this, dedicated themselves to studying the stars and ancient scriptures, including, wait for it, the Hebrew prophecies.
Whoa, hold on. You're saying that way back then, in Persia, people were actually reading and studying the Hebrew scriptures. Some serious dedication to ancient texts. I mean, it makes you wonder how those prophecies were spreading and influencing people across different cultures.
It's fascinating, right? And here's another detail that's easy to miss. They were Gentiles, not Jewish. This becomes super important as the story goes on.
Okay, now for the part that always gets me,
Mm-hmm.
the star. Was it a real, like, actual astronomical event, or was it more symbolic?
The chapter describes it as something totally unique, something that wasn't just a normal fixed star or a regular planet. It was a sign divinely orchestrated, to guide the Magi to something huge, something extraordinary.
So like a cosmic GPS leading them to the ultimate destination.
Exactly. And it says a lot about their faith, that they were willing to trust and follow this unknown star across such huge distances. It wasn't just some random event in the sky. It was a call to a journey of faith.
That's a powerful way to put it. It kind of reminds me of the pillar of cloud that guided the Israelites in the desert. Talk about a huge leap of faith. But speaking of leaps of faith, let's talk about their gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. You don't exactly see those at your average baby shower.
You're right. You wouldn't find those at your local Target. Each gift has so much symbolism. Gold, a precious metal, often associated with royalty, representing Jesus' kingship. And then you have frankincense, this aromatic resin used in religious ceremonies, pointing to his divinity.
I actually remember reading that frankincense was really valuable back then, like even more valuable than gold in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So not just any old incense, this was the good stuff.
Exactly. And then there's myrrh. It had some really interesting implications. It was often used in burial rituals.
Wait, so they brought a gift connected to death to a newborn baby. Talk about foreshadowing.
It's a detail that adds a whole other layer to the story, You have these lavish gifts, fit for a king, being presented to a baby in a manger. It's such a striking image of humility, amidst all this grandeur.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the contrast. The King of Kings born in such humble surroundings. But okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about the other players in this story. Specifically, King Herod. The chapter mentions that he wasn't exactly thrilled about the news of a newborn king of the Jews.
Right. So now we have Herod, a ruler who was known for being ruthless and paranoid. To really get his reaction, you have to consider the political climate at the time. Herod's position was already shaky. He was constantly trying to balance his loyalty to Rome with his control over Judea.
So like someone showing up and claiming to be the rightful king of the Jews would be a huge threat to his power, almost like an heir to his throne just suddenly appearing.
Precisely. You can imagine the rumors, the doubts, the possibility of rebellion. Herod couldn't just let this challenge go unanswered.
And then there's the priests and the scribes. They're supposed to be the experts in scripture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they act like they have no idea what's going on. It just seems so strange, especially since they were supposed to be like the ones looking for the Messiah.
That's where things get really interesting. It's less about them being clueless and more about their motivations. The chapter suggests that they were driven by pride and a really strong desire to hold on to their authority.
So maybe they felt threatened by the Magi, these foreigners who seem to have a better understanding of the prophecies than they did.
That's a really good point. They didn't want to be shown up, especially not by shepherds or Gentiles. So they basically dismissed the whole thing, choosing to stick with their own interpretations and their own power structures.
It's almost like they were blinded by their own sense of importance. It makes you wonder, if they had been more open, what could they have witnessed?
That's a great question. But their reaction, or, their lack of reaction, sets the stage for some pretty dramatic events.
Speaking of drama, Didn't Herod try to get rid of this potential rival?
He did, and his actions had devastating consequences.
That's right. The chapter really gets into how desperate Herod was and just how far he was willing to go to keep his power. I mean, just imagine being so full of fear, so paranoid that you order the unthinkable, like the massacre of innocent children.
It's awful. And it's so sad that this kind of thing has happened throughout history. We see it over and over again, people in power turning to violence and oppression just to stay in control. It makes you wonder, what was Herod even thinking? Did he really believe that he could get rid of the threat of Jesus just by killing all the babies, all the potential rivals?
It's a scary thought. But the chapter also shows how God was protecting Jesus, even in the middle of all that darkness. Remember, Joseph got a warning, a divine warning in a dream, telling him to escape to Egypt with Mary and Jesus, which is kind of like how the Israelites escaped from that cruel Pharaoh hundreds of years before. It's like this echo in history, right? Like God is reminding us that he keeps his promises and he'll protect his people, even when things seem impossible. But it's also a reminder of the terrible things that can happen when people fight for power and how innocent people get caught in the middle.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to think about how, the Magi visited Jesus and then he had to flee to Egypt. You have these Gentile wise men. They recognize Jesus as the king of the Jews, but the Jewish leaders, they don't accept him, and Herod tries to kill him. It makes you think about who really understands God's plan and who's missing it completely.
It's like God is turning everything upside down, right?
Yeah.
The people you'd think would welcome the Messiah are rejecting him, and these guys from far away, led by a star, they're the ones who recognize who he really is.
You got it. And their journey, their willingness to just follow that star wherever it took them, it's the opposite of how closed-minded the religious leaders were. They were so focused on their own interpretations, their own power, that they completely missed what was happening right in front of them.
It makes me think about how easy it is for us to get caught up in our own biases, our own ideas, and we miss the amazing things that are happening all around us. We can get so stuck in what we think we know that we don't even recognize the truth when it's right there.
It's a good reminder for all of us, isn't it? To approach life with a little humility, to be open to new ideas, and to realize that God often works in ways that we don't expect. And speaking of unexpected, let's go back to the Magi and how they reacted when they found Jesus.
Oh, right. They finally get to Bethlehem, following that star, and they find Jesus, not in a palace, but in a humble stable. It makes you wonder, what were they thinking? Were they surprised, disappointed?
Well, the chapter really emphasizes their humility and how strong their faith was. Even though there wasn't any fanfare, even though it was such a simple setting, they still recognized Jesus for who he truly was.
Right.
The king, the Messiah. They didn't let how things looked on the outside cloud their judgment or shake their belief. They bowed down and worshiped him, and they gave him their precious gifts to show their devotion.
It's such a beautiful picture of what true worship is, right? It's not about being powerful or wealthy. It's about recognizing God even in the simplest, most humble places. They had traveled so far, faced all these challenges, and yet their faith only got stronger when they found Jesus.
It's truly inspiring. Their story shows us how powerful it is to seek God with your whole heart and to trust him to guide you, even when it leads you down a path that's different, unconventional. It's like they really embodied the heart of faith, being willing to step into the unknown, to trust in something bigger than themselves.
Their story reminds us that our own journeys of faith might not always be easy or predictable. We might run into roadblocks. We might have doubts and question where we're going. But just like the Magi, if we stay open and keep looking for truth, we might be surprised by the amazing things we find, by who we meet along the way.
Exactly. And their story also shows how universal God's plan is. Remember, these were Gentiles, people from a different land and culture, and they were some of the first to recognize and worship Jesus as the Messiah. It speaks to how inclusive God's love and grace are, how they reach beyond our cultures and our ideas of what things should be like.
It's such a powerful message of hope and inclusivity,
Yeah.
and it's just as relevant today as it was back then. It reminds us that God's love isn't limited to any one group or nation. It's for everyone who seeks him with a sincere heart.
You're absolutely right. The story of the Magi challenges us to look beyond our own limited viewpoints, to embrace all the different experiences people have, and to see that at the end of the day, we're all connected in our search for meaning and purpose.
So we've talked about the Magi's amazing journey, Herod's desperate attempts to hold on to power, and how the religious leaders just wouldn't budge from their own interpretations. But what about the deeper meaning of all this? What's the real message here? the one that goes beyond the historical events?
That's a great question. And I think the chapter gives us some deep insights into the nature of faith, the clash between human ambition and God's purpose, and how God's plan wins in the end, even when people try to stop it.
And it definitely challenges us to look at our own hearts to see if we have any biases or prejudices that might be stopping us from seeing the truth, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It encourages us to be humble, to be willing to learn from others, and to be open to the unexpected ways that God might be working in our lives.
And maybe the most important thing is it reminds us that God's plan of salvation is for everyone. It's a message of hope and inclusivity that reaches across time and culture. It's a story that invites us to follow our own stars, to search for truth with passion and never give up, and to embrace the journey wherever it takes us.
I love that, and who knows what amazing things we'll discover along the way.
It feels like, wow, we've covered so much already. But there's something I'm still curious about. We talked about the Magi and how strong their faith was, and Herod and all his fear. But what about those Jewish religious leaders? What happens to them in this whole story?
That's a really good question because how they reacted, or, well, actually how they didn't react, it really says a lot. The chapter kind of hints that they're rejecting Jesus. It's like it planted this seed of bitterness that just kept growing. They couldn't wrap their heads around this idea that this little baby in this simple place could actually be the Messiah they'd been waiting for all that time.
It's like they were so focused on what they thought it should look like, their own interpretations of the prophecies, that they completely missed what was right there in front of them.
Exactly. And sadly, them not seeing the truth, it had some pretty awful consequences. It put them on this path of opposing Jesus, further and further away from the very salvation they were supposed to be upholding.
It's a huge warning, isn't it? It reminds us that sometimes we can get so stuck in our own traditions, our own ways of seeing things, that we miss the bigger picture, the way God might be working in ways we don't expect.
Absolutely. It shows how important it is to be humble, to be open to different perspectives, and to remember that God's plan often unfolds in ways that we just wouldn't predict.
So as we finish up this deep dive into this amazing chapter, what are some of the big takeaways we can hold on to?
Well, I think the story of these wise men, these magi, gives us a powerful example of what it really means to seek truth. I mean, they were willing to leave their comfort zones, to follow a star into, who knows where, to embrace something that challenged everything they thought they knew. And by doing that, they got to witness one of the most important events in history.
Their journey reminds us that searching for truth takes a lot of courage, an open mind, and a willingness to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and it's a journey that anyone can take. The Magi, these guys who aren't even Jewish, they remind us that God's love and grace are for everyone, no matter where you come from or what you believe.
So if you feel drawn to something, like a question, an idea, or even just a spiritual longing, don't be afraid to follow it. You never know what incredible things you might find.
I love that. The world is full of stars, real ones and metaphorical ones, all waiting to guide us toward greater understanding, deeper meaning.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the story of the Magi. It feels like we've only just started to uncover all the layers of this story. There's always more to discover, more to learn, more to explore. So if you liked what you heard today, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into history, faith, and all the mysteries that make us human. Who knows what fascinating topics we'll dig into next. Thanks for listening.